Hello again, and welcome to the next edition of learning how to use App Builder. And now we're going to learn about creating a process. We previously dragged in the process app block, but we have not yet configured it. So far, we have configured the form itself. And so we're about to configure the process, but the first thing we need to do is connect the form to the process. And the reason we do that is so that certain content in the form, fields, widgets, and things can be updated into the process and then appear in some of the selection lists and configuration tools that we need. If you tried configuring the process without doing the connection, I'm sure it would indicate that there was an error and you need to connect a form first. You can't have a process without a form. Although I will say it is possible to have a form without a process, in which case it's just a static form that gets filled in without any workflow associated with it. So I'm going to double click on process. And we need to give it a name, and this will be the problem report process. Description. In this case here, the available form has already been selected. And now we get down to the workflow roles. Remember that when we created the app, we specified custom workflow roles, the manager and vice president. Those are listed here. We would like to make use of those in this app, so we're going to select them. By moving them over here into selected roles for this particular workflow, they now will be available within this app. So we'll click on Next. And now we're on the last page of the creation wizard, and everything looks correct. So I'm just going to go ahead and say Create. Oh, and here we are inside the process design window. And this window was laid out in the form of a flowchart. And the first node in that flowchart is already there. That's the start node, which represents the entry point into the workflow. The first thing I'm going to do is bring in step one. And in the language of iPhora, each step is represented by a task. So I'm going to drag in a task node and get it right there under the start node. And this represents step one. This is the step in which a user, when they create a new workflow, will enter the information. I'm going to double click and we'll give it a name. Enter details. You can give it whatever name you want, whatever name is most appropriate for the user that will see it, so it's clear what they need to do. Just use simple sequential numbers for the task number. That's fine in this particular workflow. And then a slightly more detailed description. Hopefully describe the problem. And now, which person is going to do this one? It's going to be the submitter. And in this workflow, it was set up so that any member of the application, which in this case is everyone in the organization, they can all submit. This section here is where we can put in checklist items. I don't know if it's really needed here, but just to demonstrate how that's done, I'll just add in a checklist item, complete all fields. And moving now to the section called action buttons, there's really only going to be two of them in this case. There's going to be one to submit the workflow, which moves it on to the next step, and then another one to sort of undo the submission, not undo the submission, but just to cancel the workflow in case it gets moved back to that step and the person submitting it just decides that they don't want to submit it anymore. So the first thing I'm going to do is edit the name of that button from accept to submit. And then I'm going to create a new action button. And this will be of the type cancel, which means it'll appear on the left side. The cancel submission. And then when I click update, we now have two exit ports, which represent buttons. And if I put the mouse over it, that represents the submit button, and that represents cancel submission. Okay, well, the next thing we need to do is send a notification to the person who is doing the next step. So I drag in a notification node, connect it. I'm just going to call it notify next, which is kind of just a shorthand I use to say that this one automatically notifies the person in charge of doing the next step. And yes, you could specify the email template and recipients and all of that jazz. But in this case, I'm just going to click on notify next, and it takes care of all of that for me. And then do update. So this notification node is already fully configured just by doing that. So let's drag in the step 2 task and connect it. This one here is going to be the manager review. It'll be task number 2, review by manager, which is not all that interesting. It's almost the same as the name, but in some cases you may need a more detailed description. And the workflow role in this case is manager. I'm not going to add any checkbox or checklist items on this one. But for the buttons, let's see. We'll have an accept one. We'll leave that as it is, but we would like one so that the manager can decline it. So we'll click on the little plus button. This will be a button of type decline, which means it's going to be on the right side of the node. We'll create it, and we'll give it a name that sounds a bit more just nice. Say, please revise. That will be the name of the button. And also we would like to force the manager to enter a comment into the history, which explains why they're not approving this to go forward in the workflow, why they're asking for revision. So what I'll do is I'll make sure this button is selected and then click on comments required and then do an update. So this particular step now has two buttons. One is called accept and the other is called please revise. And the please revise step will require a comment to be entered in the history. So the next thing we want to do is add in a couple more notify nodes. And I'm just going to do these very quickly, and you can watch as I fill them in. This particular notified node is a little bit different. Using the next step performer is primarily intended to send a notification to the person doing the next step along the lines that a new workflow has come for your attention. In this case, we're sending a workflow back for revision, so it needs different text in it. So we'll have to configure this one fully. So let me just change the name to notify submitter. And I'm going to select one of these standard templates. In this case, the one that's called Workflow Standard, please revise. And for the recipients, I click on that and say role and choose the particular role. It's going to go to the submitter. So we'll send an email to the person who submitted this workflow. It's going to use the Workflow Standard, please revise template. And there's a whole slew of standard templates included with iPhora. And not only that, you can create your own custom templates if the standard ones don't work for your particular needs. I'm also going to include this little option down here, stop process on failure. If for some reason it can't send this email, instead of advancing, it's going to sit on the current step, which will make it easier for someone to debug it later. And also that way the person doing the step will know there's a problem. Otherwise, it wouldn't pop up anything at all, and the manager would think that the person, the submitter, has already been notified. So let's click on update. Now what I need to do is connect this to step 1, because that's where it's going back to. And there. And let's drag in now task 2, no, task 3, which represents step 3. And this is the vice president review. Task number 3, description. Vice president decides action. And this is done by the vice president. And the vice president can essentially accept it, but in this case, it's not going to move on. So it'll just say complete. And if the vice president has a problem with it, we will give them an option for dealing with that as well. Give a decline option, which also again requires a comment to be entered. And so now we have buttons there for decline and for complete. Let's finish the complete section first. So let's do a few things here. Let's drag in a notification. And I'll go through this quickly and you can watch. I'm just going to send a notification to the submitter. I'm going to use the template called workflow standard completed and approved. Actually, workflow standard completed. It's not really an approved process. We're just acknowledging that the problem has been dealt with at the corporate level. In this case here, once again, we're going to send it to the submitter role, the person who submitted this. And we'll still let the process stop if there's a failure or problem. And at that point, this branch is just about done. We just bring in the complete node, and that does it. The only thing left is to decide what's going to happen when they say decline. And it actually is kind of, I guess, a please revise situation, but we're just going to leave it as decline for now. So I'll drag in a notification. We'll put it here. In this case, we're notifying the manager that there's a problem. We'll use again the workflow standard, please revise. In this case, we'll choose role and send it to the manager. And at this point, the workflow is essentially done. It's optional if we need to connect this to this exit port here to anything else. For completeness, we could just put a complete there, which says that the workflow is done, nothing else is going to happen, but it's not mandatory. A cancel or a hold one can just be left dangling with nothing connected to it. But in this case, I just went ahead and added a complete node. So what do we do now? We click on save. The first time you save it, it actually closes it as well. It won't do that on subsequent ones. We'll click on save again, and you see it stays here. But before we can use it, we have to do a build, and the build can only be done after a save. If you save it and then try to use it, it will not have the newest build. So you always have to do a build after a save. In this case, the workflow has been built. Now, there's one more thing I just wanted to add to this. And that's, I wanted to go into the form and see if I can add in a field that indicates the current person who submitted this. Here we go, submitter. Let me do this first. Let's add in one column row there, and then we'll drag in the submitter right here. And we can pretty much use most of their default settings. What this does is it will auto-populate this particular field with the name of the person submitting this form. I couldn't drag this field in earlier because until this form is connected to a workflow, it doesn't understand what a submitter is. It just thinks someone may be creating the form, but if there's no workflow, the person is not technically a submitter. But once we've connected it to a workflow, then I can come back and drag this in. So let's save that. So in my opinion, the form is now done and the process is done. So in the next installment, we will actually be configuring the grid, and we'll see how that looks when we get around to it. Thank you for listening.